Hi, folks. Professor Gulliford here. Today I'm going to introduce you to some old friends. One of the old friends is a doctor named Forrest Bird. Let's go ahead and do a screen share, and I will give you a picture of him, a couple pictures of him. Passed away a few years ago, but did amazing things for both medicine and aviation. That might seem like an interesting combination. Dr. Bird was a pilot and also an early respiratory care pioneer. This is the 60 Minutes episode on him. You would really enjoy watching that. I think it's about a 20-minute piece. But oh my gosh, what a life he lived and how much he accomplished. I'll tell you one story that I love about him. He would go to a big car auction, like a Barrett Jackson type car auction or whatever, but he would buy a one-way ticket because he knew that he didn't need to fly home because he would buy something and be driving it back to Idaho where his ranch was at. So that's Morley Safer talking with Forrest Bird. And then also, this is the Congressional Medal of Honor. So he did a lot in his career. Now we'll stop the share. One of the most important things he did was to invent the ventilator as we know it. There was the iron lung, developed specifically for polio, but then a positive pressure ventilator was needed, and he's the guy that came up with it. I've got one right here from the 1940s. So glad that I held on to this. No, I wasn't alive in the 40s. I'm old, but I'm not that old. But it was passed on to me by a program director from Lawton, Oklahoma, and I'm so glad that he did that. So this thing is a positive pressure ventilator. If the case it's in looks familiar to you in any way, that's because it's a recipe card box. You can actually open it up just like you would to pull out a recipe. One of my professors at Ohio State, as a joke that went through the years, he had a recipe for beer cheddar fondue that was in the ventilator. As a way of reminding us about that story. Dr. Bird got in trouble with his wife for stealing her recipe card file to make his ventilator. He already had all the pieces, but he just needed a case, and that's how it happened. Dr. Bird insisted on calling that the breathing tube. That's where the circuit would connect. We all call it ventilator circuit today. There's a nebulizer line. You could run a nebulizer with this early ventilator. Pretty cool. And a pressure setting. Pressure limit would typically be around 20, sometimes 25 for most patients. And then the pressure manometer, the gauge right on the top, and that control is flow rate. No numbers on flow rate. He just let us adjust it based on needed a little more flow, needed a little less flow. So very basic, but let me tell you something. This was instrumental in winning World War II. How is that possible? The Japanese pilots had oxygen. They were getting oxygen. That allowed them to go to a certain altitude. I don't know what it would have been, but they didn't have pressure. With Dr. Bird's ventilator, our pilots had pressure. You might think of it as CPAP or BiPAP. Actually, it probably would be CPAP. But our pilots could go higher. And guess what? In a dogfight in World War II, the pilot who can go higher is going to win that dogfight because now he's coming down on an opponent who might see him on radar but can't imagine why he's higher than the opposing airplane. So very significant factor in winning World War II. Also helped a lot of patients that we needed to be able to breathe for. That led to something better. And the better thing is called a Bird Mark 8. This is the Bird Mark 8. This would be from the late 1960s, I would say, early 1970s. Dr. Bird insisted on a very specific sequence of setting the ventilator. And he numbered the controls. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'll read them to you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, because he wanted it done in a certain way that would make most sense. Setting 1 is the pressure, and it's done over here. Turn that so you can see this. That is the pressure setting. What that did was move a magnet inside the ventilator to give more or less pressure. We'd usually start about 15, and maybe wind up at 20, not much above 20. That was the pressure, and that would actually inflate the patient's lungs under pressure. The thing is, I'm going to actually hook this up here in a few minutes and ventilate some pig lungs for you to see that actually work. It's quite an operation to get this thing to ventilate today, but we're gonna get at it. Number two, you only had an option to pull this thing out for air mix, which was 40% about, or push it in for 100% oxygen, one way or the other. That was a very limiting factor with this ventilator, is that it only had 40 or 100. That's it. Setting 3, expiratory time. Since we didn't actually have a rate control, the expiratory time determined how much time the patient had to exhale before the next breath came in. So essentially that became the rate setting. If you wanted to go faster, you would do a decrease in expiratory time. Setting 4 was sensitivity, and that's how much pressure does the patient need to draw in order to trigger the ventilator? How much pressure? And the answer to that was usually about -3 centimeters of water, not very much. We wanted it to be sensitive, so it was easy for the patient to sigh. Setting 5 is flow rate. You would set the flow rate so the patient had adequate time to get the breath in and also exhale. We'd set a little faster flow rate for emphysema because they needed more time to get the breath out. But 30 to 40 was pretty typical. And then here's setting 6, and setting 6 never worked. It was terrible. It was a great idea that never worked, and that's called negative pressure on expiration. The idea, think about what we've told you about emphysema so far. You've got all that trapped air in the patient's lungs. So not just Dr. Bird, but a lot of people thought it might help to pull it out with a little vacuum at the end. Not a lot, maybe -3, -5, something like that. But that was the idea, and it never worked. What it did was cause the airways to collapse even sooner. So it worked against us. And later versions of this ventilator and all other ventilators had that removed because it never worked. It was a great idea that never worked. Here's the circuit. It's a very simple circuit. It's got lines for sensitivity and pressure sensing and the actual ventilator circuit, which attaches right here. So what I'm going to do now is stop this video and make you a separate video of actual ventilation happening with this ventilator. I'm going to hook it up to an air compressor because I don't have the stand. I don't have the setup that would make it work with oxygen, but it'll work on compressed air. And we'll do that. That'll be a separate video because I don't know how to pause and restart and all those kind of things. So, but at any rate, that's it. Bird Mark 8, IPPB. Oh, very important. There's one board question that is still answered correctly, IPPB. Let me tell you what that is. They give you a set of blood gases. You guys have been reading blood gases now, and I'm proud of you, by the way. You're doing good on that. But they'll give you a set of blood gases where the patient needs more ventilation. More ventilation. Then they give you 3 options that would not improve ventilation. They would only improve oxygenation. Things like CPAP, PEEP, raise the FiO2, things like that. And they give you one option that would increase ventilation, and that's IPPB. So it's still the correct answer for one question on the test. You've now seen the Bird Mark 8. Did I mention it's clear so the therapist can see what's going on inside? At any rate. So the next video you see will just be pig lungs being ventilated because I've got to go through some steps here with an air compressor to get it to fire for you. Okay, watch for the next video if you would.